Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the corridors of time, beyond the pyramids that pierce the desert sky, beyond the pharaohs who claimed divinity, to a world where gods walked among mortals and the very fabric of reality was woven from myth and magic. Tonight, we journey into the complete tapestry of Egyptian mythology, not just the famous names you might recognize, but the forgotten whispers, the buried secrets, and the profound mysteries that shaped one of humanity's greatest civilizations for over 3,000 years. This isn't just another retelling of stories you've heard before. What we're about to explore together goes deeper than the textbooks dare to venture. We'll uncover how these ancient beliefs didn't just explain the world, they created it, shaped it, and left fingerprints on human consciousness that we still carry today. From the primordial waters of chaos to the intricate dance of divine politics that rivaled any modern drama, Egyptian mythology wasn't merely stories told around fires. It was a living, breathing system that governed everything from the flooding of the Nile to the fate of souls in the afterlife. But here's what makes tonight's journey different. While most people know a few scattered tales, Isis and Osiris perhaps, or the sun, God Ra sailing across the sky, the true power of Egyptian mythology lies not in individual stories, but in how they all connect, how they evolved, and how they reveal something profound about the human need to understand our place in an incomprehensible universe. We'll trace the golden thread that runs through millennia of belief, showing you how a civilization's entire worldview was built upon foundations of myth that were anything but primitive. As we begin this exploration, you'll discover that Egyptian mythology wasn't static. It breathed, it changed, it adapted across dynasties and kingdoms, absorbing influences and transforming itself while maintaining an unbroken core that speaks to something eternal in the human experience. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and prepare to witness the birth of gods, the creation of worlds, and the endless cycle of death and rebirth that defined not just ancient Egypt, but echoes still in the deepest chambers of our collective memory. In the beginning, there was nothing but none, the primordial waters of chaos that stretched endlessly in all directions. Imagine, if you can, a darkness so complete that the very concept of light had not yet been born. No sky, no earth, no boundaries between anything because there was no anything to have boundaries. Just the infinite dark waters of potential, holding within their depths every possibility that would ever exist. From these waters, through an act of pure will, emerged the first consciousness, Atum, whose name means the complete one. But Atum was alone in the vast emptiness, and loneliness, even for a god, was unbearable. So Atum performed the first creative act in existence. Some texts tell us he spoke the first words, his voice cutting through the eternal silence. Others suggest something more intimate, that he brought forth the first gods through his own divine essence, creating from himself because there was nothing else from which to create. This moment of creation wasn't violent or dramatic. It was quiet, almost tender, the universe taking its first breath. From Atum came Shu, the god of air and light, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and order. Picture these first moments, light piercing the darkness for the very first time, the heavy waters beginning to separate as air carved out the first space, moisture bringing the possibility of life. Shu and Tefnut were more than just gods. They were the fundamental forces that would make existence possible. But creation is never simple, and even gods can lose their way. Shu and Tefnut wandered into the dark waters and became lost in the vastness of Nun. Atum, desperate to find his children, tore out his eye and sent it searching through the primordial chaos. When the eye finally returned with Shu and Tefnut, Atum wept with joy, and from his tears fell the first human beings. Even in this earliest myth, we see a truth that would echo through all Egyptian thought: that humans were born from divine emotion, connected to the gods not through command, but through love and loss. The reunion of Atum with his children marked the next phase of creation. Shu and Tefnut, now reunited with their father, brought forth their own children: Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. But here, the mythology reveals its first great drama. Geb and Nut fell deeply in love, embracing so tightly that there was no space between earth and sky. Their passionate union left no room for anything else to exist, no space for the sun to travel, no room for life to flourish. This cosmic embrace had to be broken, and it fell to Shu, their father, to separate them. With tremendous effort, Shu lifted Nut high above Geb, creating the space between earth and sky that we know today. If you've ever seen ancient Egyptian art depicting a man holding up a woman covered in stars while another figure lies beneath, you're looking at this primordial family drama. Shu forever holding apart the earth and sky, maintaining the space where life could exist, but Nut was not content to be separated from her beloved Geb. She arched her star-covered body across the heavens, her fingertips touching the eastern horizon, her toes the western edge of the world. Each day, she would swallow the sun god Ra as he completed his journey across the sky, and each night, she would give birth to him again at dawn. This wasn't just an explanation for the daily cycle of sun and night. It was a love story, a tale of separation and eternal longing that played out across the cosmos every single day. From the union of Geb and Nut, before their separation, came the next generation of gods, the ones whose stories would shape Egyptian religion for millennia. There was Osiris, who would become the god of the dead and the afterlife; Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood; Set, the god of chaos and the desert; and Nephthys, the goddess of mourning and the hidden. These four siblings would create the most enduring and complex myths in all of Egyptian religion. Stories that weren't just entertainment, but sacred truths that explained everything from the flooding of the Nile to the proper way to bury the dead. The creation myth reveals something profound about how the ancient Egyptians understood existence. Unlike creation stories that begin with divine command or cosmic violence, the Egyptian version starts with loneliness and the need for connection. The universe wasn't created through power alone, but through love, loss, and the fundamental desire to not be alone. This would become a recurring theme throughout Egyptian mythology, that the gods, despite their immense power, experienced the same emotions, the same needs, the same struggles as mortals. As these first gods established the basic structure of reality, they also created the principles that would govern both divine and human behavior. Ma'at, the concept of truth, justice, and cosmic order, wasn't just a goddess, but the fundamental law that kept chaos at bay. Without Ma'at, the universe would collapse back into the primordial waters of none. This made every action, every word, every thought part of a cosmic balance that had to be maintained. The creation story also established the cyclical nature of Egyptian thought. Just as Nut swallowed and rebirthed the sun each day, just as the Nile flooded and receded in endless cycles, the Egyptians understood time not as a straight line, but as an eternal wheel. Death was followed by rebirth, chaos by order, separation by reunion. This cyclical understanding would influence everything from their elaborate burial practices to their concept of kingship, where each pharaoh was both the culmination of all who came before and the beginning of all who would follow, but creation was only the beginning. As the gods established their realms and roles, conflicts arose that would shake the very foundations of the world. The most crucial of these conflicts would center around the brothers Osiris and Set, a rivalry that would introduce death into the world, establish the concept of resurrection, and create the template for the eternal struggle between order and chaos that defined Egyptian civilization. The story begins with Osiris, the eldest son of Geb and Nut, who became the first king of Egypt. Under his rule, Egypt flourished. Osiris taught humans agriculture, showing them how to plant and harvest grain, how to brew beer and make bread. He gave them laws and showed them how to worship the gods properly. His reign was a golden age when the Nile flooded perfectly each year, the crops grew abundantly, and peace reigned throughout the land. Osiris was everything a king should be: wise, just, beloved by his people. He was married to his sister Isis, a union that wasn't just political but cosmic, representing the perfect balance of male and female principles that maintained the universe's harmony. Isis herself was no mere consort, but a goddess of immense power, skilled in magic, and beloved by both gods and mortals. Together, they represented the ideal of divine kingship that would inspire pharaohs for thousands of years. But perfection breeds envy, and Osiris had a brother whose heart grew dark with jealousy. Set, god of the desert, storms, and chaos, watched his brother's success with growing resentment. Where Osiris brought life and order, Set embodied the harsh, unpredictable forces that threatened civilization. Sandstorms that buried cities, droughts that withered crops. The endless expanse of desert that surrounded the fertile Nile Valley, like a constant reminder of what lay beyond the boundaries of human control. Set's jealousy wasn't merely personal, it was cosmic. In the Egyptian understanding, Set represented necessary chaos, the force that tested and strengthened order. But jealousy corrupted this natural role, turning the god of necessary challenge into an agent of destructive evil. The stage was set for a conflict that would fundamentally change the nature of existence itself. The murder of Osiris is one of the most powerful and enduring myths in human history, told and retold in various forms across 3 millennia. Set's plan was elaborate and cruel. He commissioned a beautiful wooden chest, crafted to fit Osiris's exact dimensions, and brought it to a feast attended by both gods and mortals. At the height of the celebration, Set announced that whoever could fit perfectly inside the chest would be given it as a gift. One by one, the guests tried to squeeze into the ornate box, but none fit properly. When Osiris's turn came, he lay down inside the chest, and it fit him as perfectly as if it had been made for him, which, of course, it had been. The moment Osiris was fully inside, Set's conspirators slammed the lid shut and sealed it with molten lead. They carried the chest to the Nile and threw it in, watching as the river carried away the first king of Egypt. This wasn't just murder, it was the introduction of death into the world. Before this moment, death as we understand it didn't exist. The gods were immortal, and humans lived in a golden age where the natural order seemed permanent and unbreakable. Osiris's death shattered this paradise, introducing mortality, grief, and the terrible knowledge that even the most beloved and powerful could be destroyed. The chest containing Osiris's body floated down the Nile and out into the Mediterranean, eventually washing ashore at Byblos, in what is now Lebanon. There, a magnificent tree grew around the chest, encasing it completely within its trunk. The king of Byblos, amazed by the tree's beauty and size, had it cut down and made into a pillar for his palace, unknowingly making the dead god a central support of his home. Meanwhile, Isis learned of her husband's fate and began the first great journey of mourning in recorded mythology. She cut off her hair, tore her clothes, and wandered throughout Egypt and beyond, searching for Osiris's body. Her grief was so profound that it stopped the Nile from flooding, threatening to bring famine and death to all Egypt. The other gods, moved by her sorrow and desperate to restore the natural order, helped her in her search. When Isis finally discovered Osiris's body within the pillar at Byblos, she used her magical powers to retrieve it and brought it back to Egypt. But her joy was short-lived. Set discovered that his brother's body had been recovered, and in a rage, he tore it into 14 pieces, scattering them throughout Egypt to ensure that Osiris could never be restored. This act of dismemberment deepened the tragedy, but also set the stage for the first resurrection. Isis, helped by her sister Nephthys and the jackal-headed god Anubis, began the painstaking process of searching for each piece of Osiris's body. This quest became the prototype for all future Egyptian burial practices and beliefs about the afterlife. The careful mummification process, the elaborate tombs, the detailed spells and rituals, all of these grew from Isis's desperate attempt to make her husband whole again. The search for Osiris's scattered remains became more than just a divine drama. It became a map of Egypt itself. Each piece of the god's body was said to have been found in a different location, and temples were built at these sites. This transformed the entire land into a sacred geography where every temple, every city, every nome had its connection to the dismembered god. Egypt became not just a country but a body, Osiris's body, and the pharaoh who ruled it became the living embodiment of the resurrected god. When Isis finally gathered 13 of the 14 pieces, only one remained missing, lost forever to the Nile. She performed the first mummification. Using her knowledge of magic and the assistance of Anubis, who became the god of embalming, she wrapped Osiris's restored body and spoke the words of power that would bring him back to life. But this resurrection was different from his original existence. Osiris could not return to rule the living world. Instead, he became king of the dead, ruler of the afterlife, judge of souls in the realm beyond death. This transformation established one of the most important concepts in Egyptian religion, that death was not an ending, but a transition. Osiris's resurrection proved that death could be overcome, but only through proper preparation, ritual, and moral behavior. Every Egyptian who hoped for eternal life would follow Osiris's path, undergoing mummification and judgment to earn their place in the afterlife. But the story of Osiris and Set was far from over. Before Osiris's death, Isis had conceived a child, and she gave birth to Horus while hiding in the marshes of the Nile Delta. This child, born of a murdered father and a grieving mother, would grow up to become the avenger who would restore balance to the world. The stage was set for an epic conflict between uncle and nephew, between chaos and order, between the old world that Set had destroyed and the new world that Horus would create. The tale of Horus's childhood and eventual triumph over Set would become the template for pharaonic kingship, the cycle of royal succession, and the eternal struggle between good and evil that defined Egyptian civilization. But that is a story for the next part of our journey through the vast landscape of Egyptian mythology, where gods wage war across the heavens, and the fate of both divine and mortal worlds hangs in the balance. As we pause here in our exploration, let your mind rest with these images of creation and destruction, of love and betrayal, of death and resurrection, that formed the foundation of one of humanity's most enduring mythological traditions. The child who would restore balance to the world was born in secret, hidden among the papyrus reeds where the Nile Delta spreads into countless waterways. Isis, still mourning her murdered husband, knew that Set would not hesitate to kill the infant if he discovered Horus's existence. So she raised her son in the marshes, protected by the goddess Wadjet, the cobra deity, who would later become the protective uraeus worn on every pharaoh's crown. But even in hiding, danger found the young god. Set's influence spread like poison through the land, and his agents, scorpions, serpents, and creatures of the desert, constantly threatened the divine child. One night, as Isis returned from gathering food, she found Horus lying motionless, his small body rigid with the venom of a scorpion's sting. The goddess's anguish filled the heavens, and her cries were so piercing that Ra himself stopped his solar bark in its journey across the sky. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and magic, descended from the heavens to help. He taught Isis the words of power that could draw poison from flesh, heal wounds that seemed fatal, and restore life to what appeared dead. This became the first healing magic, and from that moment forward, Isis was revered not only as a goddess of motherhood, but as the great healer whose spells could overcome any illness or injury. As Horus grew to young manhood in the hidden marshes, his divine nature began to manifest. He could transform into a falcon and soar above the wetlands, his keen eyes seeing everything that moved below. He learned to hunt and fight, but more importantly, he learned justice from his mother's stories about his father's righteous reign. Every night, Isis would tell him about Osiris, how he had brought civilization to Egypt, how he had ruled with wisdom and compassion, and how Set's jealousy had destroyed the Golden Age. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were Horus's education in kingship. Through them, he learned that a true ruler serves his people rather than commanding them, that justice must be tempered with mercy, and that the pharaoh's role is to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order that keeps chaos at bay. But perhaps most importantly, he learned that some wrongs can only be set right through direct confrontation with evil, even when that evil wears the face of family. When Horus reached maturity, he emerged from the marshes and presented himself to the divine court, claiming his birthright as Osiris's heir. This wasn't simply a matter of royal succession, it was a cosmic necessity. Egypt had suffered under Set's chaotic rule. The Nile's floods had become unpredictable, crops failed randomly, and the desert steadily encroached on the fertile lands. The natural order itself was breaking down because the wrong god sat on the throne. The trial that followed became the template for all future legal proceedings in Egypt. The gods assembled as a great tribunal, with Ra presiding as judge, though his sympathies seemed to lean towards Set, his faithful defender against the forces of chaos. The case wasn't simply about who had the better claim, it was about what kind of world Egypt would become. Set argued his case with cunning eloquence. He pointed out that Horus was young and untested, while he himself had proven his strength by standing in Ra's solar bark each night, fighting off the serpent Apophis that tried to devour the sun god. Without Set's daily battles against the forces of absolute chaos, he claimed, the sun would never rise again. How could this vital role be entrusted to an untested youth who had spent his life hiding in swamps? Horus countered by appealing to the principle of legitimate succession and divine justice. He was Osiris's rightful heir, born of the god's union with Isis. More than bloodline, however, he represented the restoration of Ma'at, the return of proper order after Set's destructive reign. The young god spoke eloquently about his vision for Egypt, a land where the Nile would flood reliably, where crops would grow abundantly, where humans could live in harmony with the gods. The divine court was split. Some gods favored Set's experience and proven strength. Others were moved by Horus's youth and idealism. But Thoth, the wise scribe of the gods, pointed out that this dispute could not be resolved through words alone. The two claimants would have to prove their worthiness through a series of contests that would test not just their strength, but their wisdom, cunning, and divine nature. What followed was a series of challenges that lasted 80 years. Contests that became the stuff of legend and established many of the rituals and beliefs that would define Egyptian religion. The first challenge was a race of boats, but Set cheated by making his vessel from stone painted to look like wood. When Horus discovered the deception, he didn't simply expose it. He used his own cunning, creating a boat that appeared to be made of stone, but was actually crafted from lightweight wood, covered in a thin layer of plaster. The boat race revealed something crucial about the nature of divine justice in Egyptian thought. Victory didn't always go to the strongest or most obvious candidate, but to the one who could combine strength with wisdom, who could match cunning with cunning while maintaining righteousness. Horus won not because he was pure and innocent, but because he could navigate the complexities of a world where even gods might bend the rules. The contests escalated in both spectacle and significance. There were battles of strength where the two gods hurled massive stones across the desert, creating the rock formations that still dot the Egyptian landscape. There were contests of transformation, where each god took different animal forms to demonstrate their mastery over nature. Set appeared as a mighty hippopotamus, lord of the river's dangerous depths, while Horus became the falcon, master of the sky, and symbol of divine kingship. But perhaps the most significant contest was also the most disturbing, a challenge that revealed the darker aspects of divine nature that Egyptian mythology never shied away from. Set, growing desperate as he lost contest after contest, proposed a final test of masculine power. The details of this challenge are often glossed over in modern retellings, but the ancient Egyptians recorded it with unflinching honesty. Set attempted to sexually dominate Horus, believing that if he could establish this hierarchy, his claim to the throne would be validated. The young god, however, was not the naive victim Set expected. With his mother's cunning flowing through his veins, Horus turned the tables on his uncle, ensuring that Set's own seed would be used against him. When the gods were called to judge this final contest, Thoth summoned forth the evidence, and it became clear that Set had been outwitted by his supposedly innocent nephew. This contest, uncomfortable as it may seem to modern sensibilities, revealed profound truths about power and domination in the ancient world. The Egyptians understood that political power often involved elements of sexual dominance, that kingdoms could rise or fall based on perceived strength or weakness in their rulers. By showing Horus's ability to turn Set's aggression against him, the myth established that true kingship required not just righteousness, but the cunning and strength to protect that righteousness against those who would corrupt or destroy it. The 80-year trial finally reached its climax when the gods, exhausted by the endless contests and increasingly disturbed by Set's desperate tactics, turned to Osiris himself for judgment. The dead god, speaking from his throne in the afterlife, declared that justice demanded his son inherit the throne of the living, while Set should be compensated with dominion over the desert lands and storms, the chaotic but necessary forces that tested and strengthened civilization. This resolution was more than just a legal decision. It established the fundamental structure of Egyptian cosmology. Horus became the living pharaoh, the god-king who ruled Egypt and maintained Ma'at in the world of the living. Set retained his role as a lord of chaos and the desert, the force that challenged order but was ultimately contained by it. And Osiris ruled the afterlife, judging the souls of the dead and ensuring that justice extended beyond the grave. The coronation of Horus marked the beginning of pharaonic kingship as the Egyptians understood it. Every pharaoh who would ever rule Egypt was believed to be the living embodiment of Horus, wielding the god's authority and carrying his responsibility to maintain cosmic order. When a pharaoh died, he became Osiris, joining the community of the justified dead and ensuring continuity between the world of the living and the realm beyond death. But the ascension of Horus also established the eternal cycle that would define Egyptian history. Just as Horus had avenged his father and restored justice, each new pharaoh was expected to restore what had been damaged, to fight against chaos, and to ensure that Ma'at prevailed over Isfet, the forces of disorder and evil. This wasn't just political propaganda. It was a cosmic responsibility that weighed on every ruler who claimed the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The myth of Horus's triumph created ripples that extended far beyond the divine realm. The eye of Horus, torn out during one of his battles with Set but magically restored, became the Wadjet, the symbol of protection, healing, and royal power that appeared on amulets, temple walls, and royal regalia throughout Egyptian history. The reconciliation between Horus and Set, achieved through divine judgment rather than total victory, established the principle that even necessary opposition had its place in the cosmic order. As we follow the golden thread of Egyptian mythology deeper into its complex tapestry, we begin to see how these foundational stories created the framework for understanding everything from the daily journey of the sun to the proper conduct of human relationships. The gods weren't distant, perfect beings. They were complex personalities whose struggles, victories, and failures provided templates for navigating the challenges of both divine and mortal existence. In their stories, the ancient Egyptians found not just entertainment, but wisdom, guidance, and the assurance that even in a world where chaos always threatened, justice and order could ultimately prevail. The victory of Horus established divine kingship, but the Egyptian pantheon was far more complex than a simple tale of good triumphing over evil. As civilization flourished along the Nile, so too did the intricate web of divine relationships that governed every aspect of existence. Each city, each nome, each sacred site had its own patron deities, and these local gods didn't simply disappear when Egypt unified under the pharaohs. Instead, they wove themselves into an ever-expanding tapestry of belief that could accommodate seemingly contradictory truths with remarkable flexibility. Consider the sun god Ra, whose daily journey across the heavens became the heartbeat of Egyptian religion. But Ra wasn't always the supreme solar deity. In the beginning, he was just one of many gods vying for supremacy in the cosmic order. His rise to prominence came through a combination of political necessity and theological brilliance that shows how Egyptian mythology evolved to serve both spiritual and practical needs. As the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom consolidated power, they needed a divine patron who could represent unified Egypt's authority. Ra, with his daily journey from east to west, mirrored the pharaoh's rule over all the lands touched by the sun's light. But rather than simply declaring Ra supreme and dismissing other deities, Egyptian theologians performed something like divine diplomacy. They began merging Ra with other gods, creating composite deities that honored local traditions while establishing central authority. Thus, we see the emergence of Ra and Atum, combining the sun god with the creator deity of Heliopolis. Later came Amun-Ra, fusing the hidden god of Thebes with the solar deity to create a god of such transcendent power that he was called King of the Gods. This wasn't theological confusion, it was sophisticated religious thinking that recognized different aspects of divine truth could coexist without contradiction. The daily journey of Ra became one of the most elaborate and symbolically rich myths in Egyptian religion. Each dawn, Ra was born from the goddess Nut, emerging as a child from her star-covered body. As the day progressed, he aged, reaching full maturity at noon when his power was greatest. By evening, he had become an old man, dying as he entered Nut's mouth in the west, only to travel through her body during the night hours to be reborn again at dawn. But this wasn't simply a poetic explanation for the sun's movement. The journey had profound implications for understanding life, death, and rebirth. During the dangerous night hours, Ra's solar bark travelled through the Duat, the underworld where Osiris ruled. Here, the sun god had to navigate treacherous waters, pass through gates guarded by fearsome demons, and ultimately confront Apophis, the great serpent of chaos who sought to devour the sun and plunge the world into eternal darkness. The nightly battle between Ra and Apophis represented the eternal struggle between order and chaos that lay at the heart of Egyptian cosmology. This wasn't a battle that could be won once and forgotten. It had to be fought anew every single night for eternity. Set, despite his role as the murderer of Osiris, served as Ra's champion in this cosmic conflict, standing at the prow of the solar bark with his spear ready to drive off the serpent of chaos. This presents us with one of the most sophisticated aspects of Egyptian mythological thinking. Set wasn't simply evil, he was necessary chaos, the force that tested and strengthened order. Without Set's daily battle against Apophis, the sun would never rise. The god who had murdered Osiris was also the god who ensured that life itself could continue. This paradox reveals how the Egyptians understood that creation required both constructive and destructive forces, that chaos wasn't the opposite of order, but its necessary partner in the cosmic dance. The solar journey also provided the template for understanding human death and resurrection. Just as Ra died each evening and was reborn each dawn, properly prepared souls could follow the same path through the underworld to achieve eternal life. The elaborate burial practices, the detailed maps of the afterlife found in texts like the Book of the Dead, the careful mummification processes, all of these grew from the understanding that death was not an ending, but a dangerous journey that could lead to glorious rebirth. But Ra's story reveals another crucial aspect of Egyptian mythology: its capacity for change and adaptation. As political power shifted from Memphis to Thebes during the Middle Kingdom, so too did the supreme solar deity. Amun, originally a relatively minor Theban god of hidden power, began to merge with Ra, creating Amun-Ra, a deity who combined the visible power of the sun with the hidden mysterious forces that moved behind the scenes of existence. This theological evolution wasn't arbitrary. It reflected real changes in how Egyptians understood divine power. The Old Kingdom pharaohs had ruled as living gods, their authority direct and unquestioned like the blazing sun at noon. But as Egypt faced invasions, civil wars, and the collapse of central authority during the First Intermediate Period, a more nuanced understanding of divine power emerged. Sometimes the gods worked in hidden ways, their purposes mysterious, their power no less real for being invisible. Amun-Ra embodied this new understanding. He was the hidden one whose form is unknown, yet also the blazing sun whose light reached every corner of creation. He could appear as a ram, a goose, a serpent, or a man, but his true form remained mysterious. This theological sophistication allowed Egyptian religion to accommodate both the need for accessible, understandable deities and the growing awareness that ultimate divine reality might be beyond human comprehension. The rise of Amun-Ra also demonstrates how Egyptian mythology served political purposes without losing its spiritual authenticity. When the pharaohs of the New Kingdom expanded Egypt's borders and established an empire stretching from Nubia to the Euphrates, they needed a god who could represent universal sovereignty. Amun-Ra, with his hidden power and solar authority, fit perfectly. He became not just Egypt's supreme deity, but a universal god whose authority extended over all peoples and all lands touched by the sun. Yet even as Amun-Ra reached the heights of divine supremacy, other gods continued to play crucial roles in the cosmic order. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, served as the divine scribe who recorded the deeds of gods and mortals alike. His role wasn't merely administrative. He was the god who maintained the cosmic order through knowledge, who knew the words of power that could heal or harm, who understood the hidden connections between all things. Thoth's wisdom was not just intellectual, but practical and moral. He served as mediator in divine disputes, using his knowledge to find solutions that preserved justice while maintaining cosmic balance. When Horus and Set fought their 80-year battle for the throne, it was Thoth who designed the contests that would reveal their true natures. When Isis needed magic to heal the poisoned Horus, it was Thoth who taught her the necessary spells. The god of wisdom also played a crucial role in the afterlife, where he served as the scribe who recorded the results when human hearts were weighed against the feather of Ma'at. This wasn't simply bookkeeping. Thoth's records determined whether souls achieved eternal life or were devoured by Amit, the composite monster who consumed the unworthy dead. His role made him both the keeper of divine knowledge and the ultimate arbiter of human destiny. Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, represented yet another approach to understanding divine power. Unlike Atum, who created through speech or physical generation, Ptah created through thought and divine word combined. He conceived creation in his heart and spoke it into existence, making him the patron of craftsmen, architects, and all who shaped raw materials into meaningful forms. The theology of Ptah reveals how Egyptian religious thinking could accommodate multiple creation myths without contradiction. Atum created through lonely self-generation in the primordial waters. Ra created through the power of his solar light and heat. Ptah created through divine intelligence and craftsmanship. Each approach revealed different aspects of the creative process, different ways of understanding how order emerged from chaos, how meaning arose from meaninglessness. This theological flexibility extended to goddess worship as well, where figures like Hathor embodied the nurturing creative aspects of divine femininity. Hathor was simultaneously the goddess of love, music, dance, and joy, and the fierce protector who could become the Eye of Ra, the destructive force that punished humanity's rebellion against divine order. She could appear as a beautiful woman, a cow, or a lioness, depending on which aspect of her nature was needed. The duality inherent in Hathor's nature reflects a profound understanding of feminine divine power that runs throughout Egyptian mythology. Goddesses weren't simply gentle, nurturing figures. They possessed the full spectrum of creative and destructive power. Isis could heal and resurrect, but she could also work devastating magic against those who threatened her family. Sekhmet brought plague and destruction, but she could also cure diseases and protect the innocent. This complex understanding of divine femininity influenced how Egyptians viewed earthly women as well. While Egyptian society was certainly patriarchal in many ways, women possessed legal rights and religious authority that were unusual in the ancient world. They could own property, initiate divorce, serve as priestesses, and in rare cases, even rule as pharaohs. The divine precedent set by goddesses who wielded both creative and destructive power provided a theological foundation for feminine authority that persisted throughout Egyptian history. As we delve deeper into this divine ecosystem, we encounter Bastet, the cat goddess who protected homes and families while also serving as a fierce defender against evil spirits. Her dual nature, as both domestic protector and savage hunter, reflected the Egyptians' deep understanding of feline nature and their recognition that the same qualities that made cats beloved companions also made them formidable predators. The worship of Bastet reveals how Egyptian religion could find the sacred in the everyday. Cats weren't worshipped because they were exotic or mysterious, but because they embodied qualities the Egyptians valued: independence, vigilance, protective instincts, and the ability to move between the domestic and wild worlds. Every household cat was a little piece of the divine, a living reminder that the gods were present in ordinary life, not just in temple rituals and royal ceremonies. Sobek, the crocodile god, represented the dangerous power of the Nile itself. Crocodiles were simultaneously revered and feared, seen as embodiments of the river's life-giving and life-taking aspects. Sobek could ensure the Nile's beneficial flood, but he could also drag unwary travelers beneath the waters. His worship required careful balance, enough respect to ensure his favor, but not so much familiarity as to forget his dangerous nature. The complexity of Sobek's worship illustrates how Egyptian religion dealt with forces that were both beneficial and threatening. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, but it was also unpredictable and dangerous. Rather than trying to domesticate or ignore this danger, Egyptian mythology acknowledged it, incorporated it into divine narratives, and developed rituals that honored both the beneficent and destructive aspects of natural forces. As the pantheon expanded and evolved, new deities emerged to address changing needs and circumstances. Bes, the dwarf god with a leonine face and protective nature, became popular during the New Kingdom as a household deity who protected children, women in childbirth, and families from evil spirits. Unlike the grand cosmic deities, Bes was approachable, almost comical in appearance, yet fierce in his protective role. The emergence of deities like Bes shows how Egyptian religion remained responsive to human needs throughout its long history. As urban life became more complex, as families faced new dangers and challenges, new divine protectors emerged to address these concerns. The pantheon wasn't a closed system, but a living, growing network of divine relationships that could expand to accommodate new realities while maintaining its essential character. This adaptability would prove crucial as Egypt faced the challenges of foreign conquest, cultural change, and eventual decline. The gods who had emerged from the primordial waters of Nun, who had established order from chaos, who had created the templates for kingship, justice, and eternal life, would need to demonstrate their continued relevance in a world that was changing faster than the eternal cycles of the Nile. But that is a story that leads us toward the later periods of Egyptian history, where ancient gods would encounter new challenges and find new ways to maintain their eternal presence in human consciousness. The mystery schools of ancient Egypt held secrets that went far beyond the public rituals performed in temple courtyards under the blazing sun. Deep within the inner sanctuaries, behind walls that ordinary mortals never crossed, lay a different kind of mythology, one reserved for those who had proven themselves worthy of the most dangerous knowledge. These were the mysteries of transformation, the secret teachings that explained not just how the world was created, but how consciousness itself could be remade. At the heart of these hidden teachings lay the figure of Ptah Sokar Osiris, a triple deity whose very name revealed the progression of the soul through death to rebirth. This wasn't simply another composite god created through political merger, but a profound theological statement about the nature of existence itself. Ptah represented the creative mind that conceived reality. Sokar embodied the dark passage through death and dissolution. Osiris symbolized the resurrection that awaited those who successfully navigated the journey through darkness. The initiates who entered these mystery schools underwent a process that mirrored the mythological journey of the gods themselves. They began as ordinary humans, bound by the limitations of mortal consciousness, but through carefully orchestrated rituals and teachings, they experienced symbolic death and rebirth. The process could take years, even decades, and many who began the journey never completed it. Those who did emerged fundamentally changed, no longer quite human, but not yet divine. Something in between, something new. The mythology surrounding these transformations was far more complex than the stories told to ordinary believers. Where public religion spoke of the soul's journey through the afterlife after bodily death, the mystery schools taught that this journey could be undertaken while still alive. The initiate learned to navigate the same treacherous paths that Ra traveled each night, to confront the same demons that threatened the solar bark, to face the same judgment that awaited souls in the Hall of Two Truths. But perhaps the most closely guarded secret was the teaching about the nature of the gods themselves. To the uninitiated masses, the deities were external beings to be worshipped and appeased. To the mystery school initiates, the gods were revealed as aspects of consciousness itself, archetypal forces that existed not just in the heavens, but within the human psyche. This wasn't atheism or metaphorical thinking, but a recognition that the boundary between inner and outer reality was far more porous than ordinary perception suggested. The god Khnum, who shaped human beings on his potter's wheel from the clay of the Nile, took on new meaning within this context. The external myth spoke of a creator deity forming physical bodies, but the mystery teaching revealed that Khnum was constantly at work, reshaping consciousness itself. Every thought, every experience, every choice was part of an ongoing creative process in which humans participated as both clay and potter. This understanding transformed the meaning of divine judgment as well. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at wasn't just something that happened after death. It was happening constantly, moment by moment, as consciousness aligned itself with or against the cosmic order. The initiate learned to become their own judge, to recognize the subtle movements of Isfet, chaos, and deception within their own thoughts and actions. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of the dead, served a special role in these teachings. In public mythology, he was the god who mummified Osiris and who guided souls through the underworld. But in the mystery schools, Anubis represented the discriminating intelligence that could distinguish between truth and illusion, between what was eternal and what was merely temporal. The jackal's ability to find hidden things, to navigate by scent through complete darkness, became a metaphor for the kind of perception needed to navigate the subtle realms of consciousness. The process of initiation often involved periods of complete sensory deprivation, where candidates were sealed in dark chambers beneath the temples for days or weeks at a time. Here, deprived of external stimulation, they encountered what the texts called the gods of the depths, not evil spirits, but aspects of consciousness that remained hidden during ordinary waking life. These encounters were simultaneously terrifying and transformative, breaking down the initiate's conventional sense of self while opening doorways to expanded awareness. The mythology of Sekhmet played a crucial role in these underground teachings. The lioness goddess who nearly destroyed humanity in her rage represented the destructive power of consciousness when it turned against itself. But the mystery schools taught that this same force, properly understood and directed, could burn away the illusions that bound the soul to suffering. Sekhmet's rage became a sacred fire that consumed everything false, leaving only what was essential and true. The famous myth of Sekhmet's rampage and eventual pacification through beer mixed with red ochre took on deeper meaning in this context. The beer represented the intoxicating nature of ordinary consciousness, while the red ochre symbolized the blood of ego death. Only by drinking deeply of this mixture, by experiencing the dissolution of conventional identity, could the destructive goddess be transformed into the gentle Hathor, the nurturing aspect of divine femininity. These teachings weren't merely philosophical abstractions, but practical methods for transforming consciousness. The initiates learned specific techniques for entering altered states, for communicating with the Netru, the divine principles that governed reality. They mastered the use of sound, breath, and visualization to navigate non-ordinary states of awareness. They developed the ability to maintain conscious awareness during the process of dying, ensuring that death became not an ending, but a conscious transition to expanded existence. The god Thoth held special significance in these practices, not just as the scribe of the gods, but as the master of all transformative arts. His role as the inventor of writing was understood symbolically. He was the deity who could encode consciousness itself, who could preserve experiences and insights across the boundaries of death and rebirth. The hieroglyphic system wasn't just a writing method, but a technology for preserving and transmitting states of consciousness. The mystery schools developed elaborate correspondences between hieroglyphic symbols and specific aspects of inner experience. Each symbol was simultaneously a letter, a number, a sound, a color, a geometric form, and a state of consciousness. By learning to think in hieroglyphs, initiates developed what they called the mind of Thoth, a way of perceiving reality that revealed the hidden connections between all phenomena. The goddess Nut, whose star-covered body arched across the heavens, represented the cosmic consciousness that embraced all existence. But in the mystery teachings, she also symbolized the expanded awareness that could encompass both life and death, both order and chaos, both the manifest and unmanifest aspects of reality. To travel through the body of Nut meant to navigate the full spectrum of possible experiences while maintaining centered awareness. These initiatory journeys often involved elaborate dramatic enactments of mythological scenes. Candidates might spend months preparing to play the role of Osiris in a ritual death and resurrection, learning not just to recite the appropriate texts, but to fully embody the consciousness of the dying and reborn god. Others might take on the role of Isis, learning the magical arts needed to gather the scattered pieces of divine consciousness and restore them to wholeness. The mystery of the missing piece of Osiris, the part of his body that was never recovered after Set's dismemberment, held special significance in these teachings. This wasn't just a detail in the myth, but a recognition that something essential was always lost in the process of incarnation, something that could only be recovered through the most advanced spiritual practices. The search for this missing piece became a metaphor for the ultimate goal of the mystery schools, the recovery of complete divine consciousness while still embodied in human form. The temple complexes where these mysteries were practiced were designed as three-dimensional maps of consciousness itself. The progression from outer courtyards to inner sanctuaries mirrored the journey from ordinary awareness to enlightened perception. Each hall, each chamber, each carved relief was positioned to facilitate specific states of consciousness in those who knew how to read the architectural symbolism. The famous Temple of Dendor, with its precise astronomical alignments and hidden chambers, served as more than a place of worship. It was a machine for transformation, designed to facilitate the kind of consciousness shifts that the myths described. The movement of sunlight through the temple complex during different seasons activated specific symbolic programs, creating a living calendar of inner development that guided initiates through the various stages of their transformation. But perhaps the most profound secret of the mystery schools was their teaching about time itself. While ordinary consciousness experienced time as linear, past, present, future, following each other in sequence, the mysteries revealed time as cyclical, spiral, multi-dimensional. The myth of eternal return wasn't just a story about cosmic cycles, but a description of how consciousness actually operates when freed from the limitations of ordinary perception. The initiate learned to experience what the text called the eternal now, a state of awareness in which all times were simultaneously present. From this perspective, the mythological events weren't just ancient stories, but eternally recurring patterns that could be directly experienced and participated in. Osiris was always dying and being reborn. Horus was always fighting Set. Ra was always journeying through the underworld. These weren't events that happened once in the distant past, but ongoing processes within consciousness itself. This understanding transformed the meaning of the pharaoh's role as well. The king wasn't just symbolically identified with Horus, he was trained to actually embody the consciousness of the divine king, to become a living bridge between human and divine awareness. The elaborate coronation rituals weren't just political ceremonies, but initiatory processes designed to facilitate this transformation of consciousness. The mystery schools produced individuals who walked between worlds, who could navigate both ordinary reality and the mythological dimensions that interpenetrated it. These were the true priests and priestesses, the advisors to pharaohs, the keepers of sacred knowledge, who ensured that Egyptian civilization remained connected to its divine source even as it evolved and adapted to changing circumstances. Their influence extended far beyond Egypt's borders. Mystery school initiates traveled throughout the Mediterranean world, carrying their knowledge to Greece, Rome, and beyond. The philosophical schools of Athens, the mystery cults of Eleusis, even the early Christian communities, all bore traces of Egyptian initiatory wisdom, though often in diluted or distorted forms. As we approach the later periods of Egyptian history, when foreign conquest and cultural change would challenge the ancient order, these mystery school teachings would prove crucial for preserving the essential wisdom of Egyptian mythology. While temples were destroyed and public rituals suppressed, the inner teachings survived, passed down through secret lineages that maintained the living connection to the mythological consciousness that had created one of humanity's greatest civilizations. The gods of Egypt were never merely stories told around fires or images carved in stone. They were living forces, archetypal patterns, states of consciousness that could be directly experienced by those who possessed the keys to the mysteries. And those keys, encoded in myth and symbol, preserved in secret teachings and hidden chambers, continue to whisper their secrets to those who have ears to hear, offering pathways to transformation that remain as relevant today as they were 5,000 years ago, when the first initiate descended into the darkness beneath a temple and emerged transformed, carrying within themselves the light of the eternal stars. As Egyptian civilization reached its golden zenith during the New Kingdom, the mythology that had sustained it for millennia began to face challenges that would test its very foundations. Foreign armies marched across borders that had seemed inviolable, bringing with them not just weapons and conquest, but alien gods whose very existence questioned the supremacy of the ancient pantheon. Yet rather than crumbling under these pressures, Egyptian mythology demonstrated a remarkable capacity for adaptation and synthesis that would allow it to survive long after the pharaohs themselves had passed into legend. The arrival of the Hyksos during the Second Intermediate Period marked the first major theological crisis in Egyptian history. These foreign rulers, whom the Egyptians called rulers of foreign lands, didn't simply conquer territory. They brought with them the worship of Set in forms that native Egyptians found deeply disturbing. The Hyksos elevated Set to supreme status, not as the necessary chaos that tested order, but as a primary creative force in his own right. This theological revolution challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of divine authority and cosmic balance. But the Egyptian response to this challenge revealed the sophisticated flexibility of their mythological thinking. Rather than rejecting Set entirely or accepting the Hyksos interpretation completely, Egyptian theologians began developing new understandings of the god's role. Set became not just the murderer of Osiris, but also the protector of Ra during his nightly journey through the underworld. This theological nuance allowed Egyptians to acknowledge Set's power while maintaining their fundamental commitment to Mawat as the supreme organizing principle of existence. The expulsion of the Hyksos and the founding of the New Kingdom brought about a remarkable synthesis of mythological traditions. Amos, the pharaoh who drove out the foreign rulers, didn't simply restore the old order. He created something new that incorporated lessons learned during the period of foreign domination. The god Amun, who had been relatively minor during the Old Kingdom, now merged fully with Ra to become Amun-Ra, a deity whose hidden power could overcome any enemy, foreign or domestic. This theological evolution reflected a new understanding of divine power that would characterize the New Kingdom period. The gods were no longer seen as bound by the traditional limitations of their roles. Amun-Ra could be simultaneously the hidden god of Thebes and the universal solar deity, whose authority extended over all lands touched by the sun. This theological flexibility would prove crucial as Egyptian armies marched into Syria, Palestine, and Nubia, encountering peoples with their own ancient mythological traditions. The imperial expansion of the New Kingdom created unprecedented opportunities for mythological synthesis. Egyptian soldiers and administrators encountered the storm god Baal in Syria, the fertility goddess Astarte in Palestine, and a host of Nubian deities whose names and attributes were carefully recorded by Egyptian scribes. Rather than simply imposing Egyptian beliefs on conquered peoples, the pharaohs often incorporated foreign deities into the Egyptian pantheon, finding correspondences between alien gods and familiar Egyptian ones. Astarte, for example, was identified with both Isis and Hathor, depending on which of her aspects was being emphasized. Her role as a fierce warrior goddess aligned her with the Eye of Ra traditions, while her nurturing maternal aspects connected her to Isis's role as divine mother. This wasn't theological confusion, but sophisticated religious diplomacy that allowed conquered peoples to maintain their traditional beliefs while accepting Egyptian political authority. The goddess Anat, another Semitic deity adopted during this period, became particularly popular among Egyptian soldiers. Her fierce nature and association with warfare made her an ideal patron for military campaigns in foreign lands. But her incorporation into Egyptian mythology went deeper than simple military utility. Anat was said to be the daughter of Ra, making her a legitimate member of the Egyptian divine family while maintaining her foreign characteristics. This pattern of adoption and adaptation extended to male deities as well. Reshef, a Semitic god of plague and war, found his way into Egyptian temples where he was honored alongside traditional Egyptian deities. His worship reveals how Egyptian mythology could accommodate seemingly contradictory divine functions. Reshef could bring disease, but he could also cure it. His arrows could kill, but they could also drive away demons and evil spirits. The theological sophistication required to maintain these complex relationships between native and foreign deities reflects the high level of mythological thinking that Egyptian priests achieved during the New Kingdom. They developed elaborate correspondences that showed how different cultural expressions of divine truth could coexist without contradiction. A Syrian worshipper of Baal and an Egyptian devotee of Set were honoring different aspects of the same cosmic principle, just as a Nubian priest of Apetamak and an Egyptian servant of Amun-Ra were serving different faces of universal divine authority. But perhaps the most significant mythological development of this period was the emergence of personal piety as a complement to state religion. While the great temple complexes continued to serve the cosmic functions of maintaining Ma'at and ensuring the pharaoh's divine authority, ordinary Egyptians began developing more intimate relationships with deities who could address their personal concerns and daily struggles. The god Bez, whose popularity soared during the New Kingdom, exemplifies this trend toward personal devotion. Unlike the cosmic deities who governed the movement of stars and the flooding of the Nile, Bes was concerned with protecting individual families, ensuring safe childbirth, and warding off the minor demons and evil spirits that threatened ordinary people in their daily lives. His ugly, cute appearance and fierce protective nature made him approachable in ways that the remote, perfect forms of gods like Ra or Ptah could never be. Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess who protected women in childbirth, similarly represented this democratization of divine protection. Her cult required no elaborate temple rituals or priestly intermediaries. A pregnant woman could simply wear an amulet bearing Tawaret's image, or whisper a prayer to invoke the goddess's protection. This accessibility made divine power available to all social classes, not just the elite who could afford elaborate funeral preparations or temple donations. The development of personal piety also led to new forms of mythological expression. The wisdom literature of the New Kingdom, texts like the Instructions of Amenemhotep, wove traditional mythological themes into practical advice for daily living. These weren't dry moral treatises, but living applications of mythological wisdom to the challenges of ordinary existence. The concept of Ma'at wasn't just cosmic order, but a practical guide for ethical behavior in business dealings, family relationships, and social interactions. This personalization of mythology reached its peak in the Amarna period, when the pharaoh Akhenaten attempted to revolutionize Egyptian religion by promoting the worship of Aten, the sun disk, as the sole deity worthy of veneration. This wasn't simply monotheism in the modern sense, but a radical reinterpretation of solar mythology that emphasized the personal relationship between the divine and individual worshippers. Akhenaten's hymns to Aten reveal a mythological sensibility that was both deeply traditional and startlingly innovative. The Aten was described in terms that echoed ancient solar mythology. He was the creator who brought life to all creatures, who sailed across the sky in a solar bark, who died each evening and was reborn each dawn. But the Aten was also portrayed as intimately concerned with individual lives, as a god who could be approached directly without priestly intermediaries, whose love extended to all creation regardless of nationality or social status. The failure of Akhenaten's religious revolution demonstrates the deep roots of traditional Egyptian mythology. While the Aten cult attracted followers during the pharaoh's lifetime, it couldn't survive his death because it lacked the complex network of correspondences, the rich symbolic language, and the institutional support that had developed around the traditional pantheon over millennia. The restoration under Tutankhamun wasn't simply a political reaction, but a return to mythological systems that had proven their ability to address the full spectrum of human needs and cosmic realities. Yet the Amarna period left lasting influences on Egyptian mythology. The emphasis on personal relationship with the divine, the poetic language used to describe divine love and care, and the universalist tendencies that saw divine concern extending beyond Egypt's borders all became permanent features of later Egyptian religion. Even as the traditional gods were restored to their temples, they carried with them new dimensions of accessibility and personal concern that reflected Akhenaten's innovations. The Ramesside period that followed saw a remarkable flowering of mythological creativity, as pharaohs like Ramesses II and Ramesses III commissioned elaborate temple complexes that told the stories of the gods in unprecedented detail. The temple reliefs at Abu Simbel, Karnak, and Medinet Habu weren't just decorative art, but visual mythologies that allowed worshippers to experience divine stories through architectural pilgrimage. These temple complexes functioned as three-dimensional books, their walls and chambers arranged to tell mythological narratives through sequential reliefs and symbolic architecture. A visitor walking through the temple of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel would experience the story of the pharaoh's divine birth, his cosmic marriage to the goddess Hathor, his victories over chaos in the form of foreign enemies, and his eventual union with Ra in the solar bark. The temple wasn't just a place of worship, but a mythological environment that transformed ordinary visitors into participants in divine narratives. The mythology of the Ramesside period also shows increasing concern with the afterlife as a democratic destination rather than an elite privilege. The proliferation of papyrus copies of funerary texts, the development of simplified mummification techniques, and the creation of amulets and magical texts accessible to ordinary citizens all reflect a mythological revolution that made eternal life available to anyone who could afford basic burial preparations. This democratization of the afterlife transformed the mythology surrounding Osiris and the judgment of the dead. Where earlier periods had emphasized the pharaoh's unique ability to achieve divine status after death, New Kingdom texts increasingly portrayed the afterlife as a realm where social distinctions mattered less than moral behavior. A humble farmer who lived according to Ma'at could achieve the same eternal rewards as a pharaoh, while a corrupt official might find himself devoured by Amit regardless of his earthly status. The Book of the Dead, which reached its canonical form during this period, represents one of the most sophisticated mythological systems ever developed for navigating the transition from life to afterlife. Its spells, incantations, and ritual instructions weren't just religious formulas, but practical guides for consciousness, navigating the complex symbolic landscape of death and rebirth. Each spell corresponded to specific challenges that the soul would face in its journey through the duat, providing both mythological context and practical techniques for overcoming obstacles to eternal life. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of New Kingdom mythology was its ability to maintain coherence while accommodating unprecedented diversity. The pantheon expanded to include hundreds of deities from across the Egyptian empire, yet this expansion didn't lead to chaos or contradiction. Instead, Egyptian theologians developed increasingly sophisticated systems of correspondence that showed how all divine diversity ultimately reflected aspects of a single, transcendent reality. This theological maturity would prove crucial as Egypt faced new challenges in the form of Assyrian, Persian, and eventually Greek conquest. The mythological systems developed during the New Kingdom provided frameworks flexible enough to accommodate foreign rule, while maintaining essential Egyptian identity, profound enough to inspire continued devotion even when political independence was lost, and universal enough to appeal to peoples far beyond Egypt's traditional boundaries. As we trace the golden thread of Egyptian mythology through its imperial period, we see not a static system of ancient beliefs, but a living, evolving wisdom tradition capable of growth, adaptation, and renewal. The gods who had emerged from the primordial waters of Nun had learned to navigate the complex currents of historical change, demonstrating that mythological truth, properly understood, possesses a flexibility and resilience that can outlast any particular political or cultural configuration. The stage was now set for Egyptian mythology's greatest test, its encounter with the rational philosophy of Greece, the universal ambitions of Rome, and the revolutionary monotheism of Christianity. How the ancient gods would respond to these challenges, and what forms they would take in their struggle for survival, would determine whether the mythological wisdom of Egypt would perish with its political independence or find new ways to influence human consciousness across cultures and centuries. The arrival of Alexander the Great in Egypt in 332 BCE marked not just a political conquest, but a profound mythological encounter between two of the ancient world's most sophisticated religious traditions. The young Macedonian king didn't come as a destroyer of Egyptian beliefs, but as someone genuinely seeking divine validation from Egypt's ancient gods. His pilgrimage to the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis wasn't merely a political gesture, but a recognition that Egyptian mythology possessed wisdom that even Greek philosophy couldn't provide. The oracle's proclamation that Alexander was the son of Amun-Ra created a mythological synthesis that would reshape both Egyptian and Greek religious thinking. Alexander wasn't simply adopting Egyptian beliefs for political convenience. He was creating a new model of divine kingship that combined Greek heroic ideals with Egyptian theological sophistication. This fusion would influence royal ideology throughout the Hellenistic world and provide a template for the later Roman imperial cult. When Alexander's general Ptolemy established himself as pharaoh of Egypt, he faced the delicate task of legitimizing Greek rule over a population whose religious traditions stretched back millennia. The solution he developed, the creation of Serapis as a synthetic deity, combining aspects of Osiris with Greek divine attributes, represents one of the most successful mythological innovations in ancient history. Serapis wasn't simply Osiris with a Greek name. The new god embodied a sophisticated theological synthesis that honored both Egyptian and Greek religious sensibilities. From Osiris came the promise of resurrection and eternal life, the role as judge of the dead, and the authority over the afterlife. From Greek tradition came the emphasis on healing, the association with wisdom and learning, and the approachable nature that made divine power accessible to ordinary worshippers. The mythology surrounding Serapis drew from both traditions while creating something genuinely new. Like Osiris, Serapis had experienced death and resurrection, but his story emphasized healing and renewal rather than judgment and justice. Like the Greek healing god Asclepius, Serapis could cure diseases and provide guidance through dreams and oracles, but his power extended beyond physical healing to encompass spiritual transformation and the promise of eternal life. The cult of Serapis spread rapidly throughout the Mediterranean world, not because it was imposed by political authority, but because it addressed spiritual needs that neither traditional Greek religion nor Egyptian temple worship could fully satisfy. Serapis offered the promise of personal salvation that Egyptian mythology had always provided, but in forms that were accessible to people from diverse cultural backgrounds. The success of Serapis demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of Egyptian mythological thinking. Rather than rigidly defending traditional forms, Egyptian priests and theologians proved capable of creative synthesis that preserved essential spiritual truths while expressing them in new cultural languages. This flexibility would prove crucial as Egypt became increasingly cosmopolitan under Ptolemaic rule. The Great Library of Alexandria became a center for mythological scholarship, where Egyptian priests worked alongside Greek philosophers to explore the deeper meanings of religious traditions. The work of scholars like Manetho, who translated Egyptian mythology into Greek historical categories, created new possibilities for cross-cultural understanding, while preserving ancient wisdom in forms that could survive political upheaval. But perhaps the most significant development of the Ptolemaic period was the elevation of Isis to universal goddess status. While Isis had always been important in Egyptian mythology, her role as the divine mother, healer, and protector took on new dimensions as her worship spread beyond Egypt's borders. She became not just an Egyptian goddess, but a cosmic deity whose authority extended over all aspects of human experience. The mythology of Isis during this period emphasized her role as the goddess of 10,000 names, the divine feminine principle that manifested in countless local forms throughout the Mediterranean world. She was simultaneously the Egyptian mother goddess, the Greek Demeter, the Roman Ceres, and the Phrygian Cybele. This wasn't theological confusion, but sophisticated religious thinking that recognized how divine truth could manifest in culturally specific forms while maintaining essential unity. The Isis mysteries that developed during this period represented the democratization of the secret teachings that had once been confined to Egyptian mystery schools. Initiates from across the Roman world could experience the transformative journey of death and rebirth that had traditionally been available only to Egyptian priests and pharaohs. The mythology of Isis's search for Osiris became a template for the soul's journey toward enlightenment and spiritual transformation. These mysteries weren't simply borrowed from Egyptian tradition, but represented creative adaptations that made ancient wisdom accessible to people from diverse cultural backgrounds. The initiation rituals combined Egyptian symbolic language with Greek philosophical concepts and Roman organizational structures, creating a religious experience that was simultaneously ancient and contemporary, exotic and familiar. The popularity of Isis worship throughout the Roman world reflects the deep human need for mythological meaning that neither Greek philosophy nor Roman civic religion could fully satisfy. Isis offered personal relationship with the divine, the promise of transformation and renewal, and the assurance that individual suffering had cosmic significance. Her mythology provided answers to questions about death, meaning, and spiritual purpose that rational philosophy could address intellectually, but couldn't resolve emotionally. The encounter between Egyptian mythology and Greek philosophy also produced remarkable intellectual syntheses that would influence Western thought for centuries. Philosophers like Plutarch wrote extensively about Egyptian religious symbolism, interpreting myths of Isis and Osiris as allegories for cosmic processes and psychological development. This wasn't simply Greek rationalism imposing order on Egyptian irrationality, but genuine dialogue between different approaches to understanding reality. The Hermetic tradition that emerged from this cultural fusion represents one of the most sophisticated attempts to synthesize mythological wisdom with philosophical inquiry. The texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth with the Greek Hermes, combined Egyptian symbolic language with Greek logical structures to create a philosophical system that was simultaneously rational and mystical, practical and transcendent. These Hermetic writings weren't simply philosophical treatises, but practical guides for spiritual transformation that drew heavily on Egyptian mythological themes. The concept of spiritual rebirth, the emphasis on hidden wisdom, the understanding of consciousness as divine in nature, all of these reflected the influence of Egyptian mystery school teachings, expressed in forms that could appeal to Greek and Roman intellectuals. The Hermetic emphasis on the correspondence between macrocosm and microcosm, between celestial patterns and earthly events, drew directly from Egyptian mythological thinking that saw divine principles operating at all levels of existence. The famous Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, expressed in philosophical language, the same insight that Egyptian mythology conveyed through stories of gods, whose actions in the heavens were reflected in earthly events. As Christianity began to spread throughout the Roman world, it encountered Egyptian mythological traditions that had already demonstrated their ability to adapt and survive cultural change. The early Christian communities in Egypt didn't simply replace Egyptian beliefs with Christian ones, but created complex syntheses that preserved essential spiritual insights while expressing them in new theological frameworks. The development of Christian monasticism in the Egyptian desert drew heavily on traditions of spiritual transformation that had roots in ancient Egyptian mystery schools. The emphasis on death to the world, symbolic rebirth, and the cultivation of divine consciousness all reflected continuities with pre-Christian Egyptian spirituality expressed in Christian language and imagery. The Coptic Christianity that emerged in Egypt represented a unique fusion of Christian theology with Egyptian spiritual sensibilities. Coptic art, literature, and liturgy all bore traces of ancient Egyptian religious aesthetics and mythological thinking, creating a form of Christianity that was distinctively Egyptian while remaining authentically Christian. Even the Islamic conquest of Egypt in the 7th century CE couldn't completely erase the influence of ancient Egyptian mythology. Islamic scholars and mystics found in Egyptian wisdom traditions resources for understanding divine unity and spiritual transformation that complemented and enriched Islamic theology. The great Islamic philosopher and mystic Ibn Arabi drew extensively on Egyptian symbolic language in his writings about the unity of being and the spiritual journey toward divine realization. The survival of Egyptian mythological influences through successive waves of cultural change demonstrates the profound truth that genuine mythological wisdom addresses universal human needs that transcend any particular cultural or religious framework. The stories of death and resurrection, of the search for lost wholeness, of the journey through darkness toward light, these narratives speak to aspects of human experience that remain constant regardless of changing historical circumstances. As we trace the golden thread of Egyptian mythology through its encounters with foreign cultures and new religious movements, we see not the gradual decay of ancient superstition, but the continuous adaptation of profound spiritual insights to meet the changing needs of human consciousness. The gods of Egypt proved capable of wearing many faces, speaking many languages, and finding new forms of expression while maintaining their essential character as guides for the human journey toward meaning, transformation, and transcendence. The mythology that had begun in the primordial waters of Nun had learned to navigate the complex currents of cultural change, demonstrating that authentic spiritual wisdom possesses a flexibility and resilience that allows it to survive any particular historical configuration. As Egypt's political independence faded into memory, its mythological legacy continued to flow like an underground river, emerging in unexpected places and times to nourish new forms of spiritual understanding and creative expression. This enduring influence would prove that the true measure of mythological truth lies not in its historical accuracy or cultural purity, but in its capacity to illuminate the deepest mysteries of human existence and provide practical guidance for the eternal human quest to understand our place in the vast, mysterious cosmos that surrounds and interpenetrates our daily lives. The mythology that had sustained Egypt through millennia of change was about to face its ultimate transformation, not through conquest or conversion, but through a gradual osmosis into the very foundations of Western civilization. As the Roman Empire absorbed Egyptian religious traditions, and as Christianity spread throughout the Mediterranean world, the ancient gods found new ways to whisper their eternal truths to human souls hungry for meaning in an increasingly complex world. But to understand this final metamorphosis, we must first journey into the hidden chambers of Egyptian thought, where the deepest mysteries were preserved. The esoteric traditions that revealed the gods not merely as external beings to be worshipped, but as living archetypes within human consciousness itself. These secret teachings, passed down through generations of initiates, would prove to be the golden thread that connected ancient wisdom to medieval alchemy, Renaissance magic, and even modern psychology. In the innermost sanctuaries of temples like Dendera and Edfu, priests who had spent decades mastering the sacred arts taught that the mythological dramas playing out in the heavens were simultaneously occurring within the human soul. The battle between Horus and Set wasn't just an ancient story. It was the eternal conflict between order and chaos, consciousness and unconsciousness that every person experienced in their daily struggle towards spiritual maturity. This understanding transformed the meaning of every mythological episode. When Isis searched for the scattered pieces of Osiris, she wasn't just a grieving widow seeking her husband's remains. She represented the soul's quest to gather the fragmented aspects of divine consciousness that had been scattered by the trauma of incarnation into physical form. Each piece of Osiris's body corresponded to a different aspect of spiritual wholeness that had to be recovered and integrated through conscious spiritual work. The missing piece of Osiris, the one part of his body that was never found, held special significance in these teachings. It represented the aspect of divine consciousness that remained forever beyond the reach of ordinary human understanding, the ineffable mystery that could only be approached through direct mystical experience. This wasn't a flaw in the myth, but a recognition that ultimate reality always transcends conceptual knowledge, no matter how sophisticated or complete. The priests who preserved these teachings developed elaborate correspondences between mythological symbols and states of consciousness. The Eye of Horus wasn't just a protective amulet, but a map of different levels of perception, each part corresponding to a specific way of seeing reality. The Djed pillar of Osiris represented the human spine as the axis along which spiritual energy could ascend from earthly consciousness to divine awareness. The Ankh symbolized the union of temporal and eternal, the marriage of human and divine that was the goal of all spiritual practice. These correspondences weren't arbitrary associations, but reflected genuine insights into the nature of consciousness and its relationship to cosmic order. The priests had discovered through centuries of careful observation and practice that mythological symbols could serve as keys for unlocking specific states of awareness, as tools for navigating the subtle dimensions of inner experience that most people never consciously accessed. The process of initiation into these mysteries often took decades and required a complete restructuring of the candidate's understanding of reality. Beginning initiates learned to see through the veil of ordinary perception to recognize the mythological dimensions that interpenetrated everyday existence. Advanced practitioners developed the ability to consciously participate in mythological processes, to align their personal transformation with cosmic cycles, to become living embodiments of divine principles. The god Khepri, the scarab beetle who pushed the sun across the sky, became a particularly important symbol in these practices. The scarab's habit of rolling balls of dung across the desert was seen as a perfect metaphor for the spiritual process of transformation. Just as the beetle transformed waste matter into nourishment for its offspring, the initiate learned to transform the raw material of ordinary experience into spiritual gold through conscious participation in mythological processes. This understanding of transformation through conscious participation in mythological dramas influenced every aspect of Egyptian spiritual practice. The elaborate funeral rites weren't just ceremonies for the dead, but rehearsals for the living, opportunities to practice the consciousness transitions that would be necessary for successful navigation of the afterlife. The mummification process itself was understood as a form of alchemical transformation, preserving the body while preparing the soul for its journey through the mythological landscape of death and rebirth. The temple rituals performed daily throughout Egypt weren't mere worship services, but sophisticated technologies for maintaining the connection between human consciousness and cosmic order. Each gesture, each word, each offering was precisely calibrated to align earthly activities with celestial patterns, ensuring that the microcosm of human experience remained in harmony with the macrocosm of divine reality. As Egypt's political power waned and foreign influences grew stronger, these esoteric traditions became increasingly important as repositories of authentic Egyptian wisdom. While public religion adapted to accommodate Greek philosophical concepts and Roman administrative structures, the mystery schools preserved the original mythological consciousness that had created Egyptian civilization in its purest form. The priests who maintained these traditions developed sophisticated methods for encoding their teachings in symbols, texts, and architectural forms that could survive political upheaval and cultural change. The hieroglyphic system itself became a technology for preserving multidimensional meaning, with each symbol simultaneously conveying literal, allegorical, moral, and mystical levels of significance. A single hieroglyph could tell a story, encode a number, preserve a ritual instruction, and map a state of consciousness. The great temple complexes built during the Ptolemaic period, such as those at Dendera, Edfu, and Philae, represented the culmination of this symbolic art. Every relief, every column, every architectural detail was positioned according to precise correspondences with mythological narratives, astronomical cycles, and states of consciousness. These temples weren't just buildings, but three-dimensional books that could be read by those who possessed the keys to their symbolic language. The famous zodiac of Dendera, with its intricate mapping of celestial patterns and mythological figures, exemplifies this multi-layered approach to preserving wisdom. On one level, it was an accurate astronomical calendar marking the movement of stars and planets. On another level, it was a mythological narrative depicting the eternal drama of cosmic order and chaos. On the deepest level, it was a map of consciousness itself, showing how human awareness could align with cosmic rhythms to achieve spiritual transformation. This tradition of symbolic encoding would prove crucial for the survival of Egyptian wisdom as the ancient world gave way to new religious and cultural forms. When the last temple of Isis was closed at Philae in the 6th century CE, the priests didn't simply disappear. They went underground, preserving their knowledge in forms that could survive religious persecution and cultural amnesia. The alchemical traditions that emerged in Hellenistic Alexandria drew heavily on these Egyptian mystery teachings, translating mythological processes into chemical metaphors that could be understood by scholars from diverse cultural backgrounds. The famous maxim, "as above, so below," wasn't a Greek philosophical concept, but an expression of Egyptian mythological thinking that saw divine principles operating at all levels of existence. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus, who became the legendary founder of alchemy and Hermetic philosophy, was explicitly identified as a fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth with Greek Hermes. The texts attributed to this mythical figure preserved Egyptian teachings about consciousness, transformation in philosophical language that could appeal to rational minds while maintaining the essential insights of mythological wisdom. These Hermetic writings would later influence medieval Islamic scholars, Renaissance mages, and even early modern scientists like Isaac Newton, who spent as much time studying alchemical texts as he did developing mathematical physics. The Egyptian understanding of correspondence between inner and outer reality, between psychological and cosmic processes, provided a framework for understanding natural phenomena that complemented and enriched purely mechanical explanations. The influence of Egyptian mythological thinking can also be traced through the development of Christian mysticism, particularly in the traditions that emerged from the Egyptian desert. The desert fathers and mothers who established Christian monasticism drew heavily on Egyptian contemplative practices, adapting ancient techniques for consciousness transformation to Christian theological frameworks. The emphasis on death to the world and rebirth in Christ reflected continuities with Osirian mystery traditions, while the cultivation of divine union through contemplative practice echoed methods developed in Egyptian mystery schools. Even the Christian understanding of the soul's journey through various stages of purification and illumination toward mystical union bore striking resemblances to Egyptian initiatory processes. The Coptic Christians who preserved Christianity in Egypt after the Arab conquest maintained distinctive theological and liturgical traditions that reflected the influence of ancient Egyptian spiritual sensibilities. Their emphasis on the divine nature of Christ, their sophisticated understanding of theosis or deification, and their rich tradition of mystical literature all bore traces of mythological thinking that had been adapted to Christian expression. As we trace the golden thread of Egyptian influence through the centuries following the end of pharaonic civilization, we discover not the death of ancient wisdom, but its continuous transformation and adaptation to new cultural circumstances. The gods of Egypt had learned to speak new languages, to wear new faces, to find expression through new symbols and practices, while maintaining their essential function as guides for human consciousness, seeking connection with transcendent reality. The Renaissance recovery of Hermetic texts sparked a renewed interest in Egyptian wisdom that would influence European thought from the 15th century through the Enlightenment. Scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola found in Egyptian mythology resources for understanding the relationship between human consciousness and cosmic order that neither Christian theology nor Aristotelian philosophy could provide. Their work prepared the ground for the scientific revolution, while preserving insights about the sacred dimensions of existence that pure materialism would later struggle to accommodate. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries saw another wave of fascination with Egyptian mythology, as poets and artists found in ancient Egyptian symbols expressions of truths about human nature and cosmic reality that rational discourse could approach but never fully capture. The mysterious smile of the Sphinx became a metaphor for the enigma of existence itself, while the promise of resurrection embodied in Osiris offered hope for renewal and transformation in an age of rapid social and technological change. Even the development of modern psychology drew heavily on mythological insights that had been preserved through Egyptian sources. Carl Jung's understanding of archetypes, his recognition of the collective unconscious, and his emphasis on individuation as a process of psychological and spiritual integration all reflected ideas that could be traced back through Hermetic and alchemical traditions to their ultimate roots in Egyptian mystery teachings. The enduring fascination with Egyptian mythology and popular culture, from Hollywood movies to New Age spirituality, testifies to the continued relevance of these ancient insights for contemporary human needs. The stories of death and resurrection, of the search for lost wholeness, of the journey through darkness toward light, continue to resonate because they address fundamental aspects of human experience that remain constant despite all technological and social change. As we near the end of our journey through the vast landscape of Egyptian mythology, we begin to see that what we've been exploring isn't simply ancient history, but living wisdom that continues to evolve and find new forms of expression. The gods who emerged from the primordial waters of Nun haven't disappeared. They've learned to swim in the ocean of human consciousness, finding new ways to guide seekers toward meaning, transformation, and connection with the sacred dimensions of existence. The mythology that began with Atum's lonely emergence from chaos has become a permanent part of humanity's spiritual DNA, encoded in symbols and stories that continue to inspire, challenge, and transform human consciousness across cultures and centuries. In tracing this golden thread through time, we discover that the true measure of mythological truth lies not in its historical accuracy, but in its capacity to illuminate the deepest mysteries of human existence and provide practical guidance for the eternal quest to understand our place in the vast, interconnected web of being that encompasses all life, all consciousness, all possibility. The ancient Egyptians understood something that modern civilization is still struggling to remember: that human beings are not separate from the cosmos, but living expressions of cosmic principles, that consciousness is not produced by matter, but is the fundamental reality from which all experience emerges, and that the journey towards spiritual maturity involves learning to recognize and consciously participate in the mythological dimensions that give meaning and purpose to existence. These insights, preserved through 3 millennia of cultural transmission and transformation, remain as relevant today as they were when the first priest stood in a temple beside the Nile and spoke the words that awakened divine presence in human consciousness. The gods of Egypt continue their eternal work, whispering their secrets to those who have ears to hear, offering pathways to transformation that remain as powerful and necessary now as they were in the golden age of the pharaohs, when mythology and reality dance together in perfect harmony beneath the unchanging stars. As we approach the twilight of our journey through Egyptian mythology, we must pause to consider what happened when this ancient wisdom encountered the greatest challenge it would ever face. Not conquest, by foreign armies or suppression by alien gods, but something far more subtle and ultimately more transformative. The gradual shift from mythological consciousness to historical thinking that would reshape how humanity understood itself and its place in the cosmos. The transition didn't happen overnight. For centuries, Egyptian mythology had proven its remarkable capacity for adaptation, absorbing Greek philosophy, Roman administration, and Christian theology while maintaining its essential character. But as the medieval world gave way to the Renaissance, and as Renaissance humanism evolved into Enlightenment rationalism, the very foundations of mythological thinking came under scrutiny in ways that no amount of theological flexibility could address. The challenge wasn't simply that people stopped believing in the old gods. Belief had always been secondary to the mythological function of providing meaning, structure, and transformation. The deeper issue was that the rise of historical consciousness created new categories of truth that couldn't accommodate the fluid, symbolic nature of mythological reality. Where Egyptian thinking had seen eternal patterns playing out through time, modern consciousness demanded linear causation and empirical verification. This shift created a crisis for Egyptian wisdom that went far beyond the closing of temples or the suppression of ancient rituals. The entire framework through which mythological truth had been transmitted and understood began to dissolve. Symbols that had once served as multidimensional keys to cosmic understanding were reduced to primitive superstitions. Narratives that had encoded profound insights about consciousness and transformation became mere folklore. The sophisticated correspondences between inner and outer reality that had guided Egyptian spiritual practice for millennia were dismissed as primitive magical thinking. Yet even as the old forms crumbled, the essential truths they had preserved found new channels of expression. The Hermetic traditions that had carried Egyptian wisdom through the Hellenistic and medieval periods now influenced the development of Renaissance magic and early modern science in ways that most scholars are only beginning to understand. The famous scientists and philosophers who laid the foundations of the modern world, figures like Newton, Kepler, and even Descartes, drew more heavily on Hermetic sources than their rationalist reputations might suggest. Newton's alchemical studies, which occupied more of his time than his mathematical physics, represented a serious attempt to understand the hidden forces that governed both material and spiritual transformation. His concept of universal gravitation wasn't simply a mathematical description of physical forces, but reflected a deeper understanding of the invisible connections that bind all existence together, an insight that can be traced directly back through Hermetic traditions to Egyptian mystery teachings about the unity of all being. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries represented another form of mythological revival, as poets and artists rediscovered the symbolic language that could express truths about human experience that rational discourse could never capture. The Egyptian symbols that appeared in Romantic art and literature weren't mere exotic decorations, but attempts to recover ways of seeing and understanding that had been lost in the triumph of purely analytical thinking. William Blake's elaborate mythological system, with its emphasis on the fall and redemption of consciousness, drew heavily on Hermetic sources that preserved Egyptian insights about the journey from fragmentation to wholeness. His famous declaration that, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's," reflected the Romantic understanding that mythological thinking wasn't primitive superstition, but a necessary complement to rational analysis, a way of organizing experience that honored both the complexity of inner life and the mystery of existence itself. The emergence of depth psychology in the late 19th and early 20th centuries marked another crucial phase in the evolution of Egyptian mythological influence. Sigmund Freud's exploration of the unconscious mind, though couched in scientific language, drew heavily on mythological insights about the hidden forces that shape human behavior. His understanding of dreams as symbolic communications from unconscious depths echoed Egyptian beliefs about the soul's journey through the night world of the Duat, where symbolic encounters revealed truths that daylight consciousness could never directly access. Carl Jung's work represented an even more explicit recovery of mythological thinking for modern consciousness. His concept of archetypes, universal patterns that structure human experience across cultures and centuries, was essentially a scientific reformulation of Egyptian insights about the Neteru, the divine principles that govern both cosmic and psychological processes. Jung's emphasis on individuation as a process of integrating unconscious contents into conscious awareness paralleled the Egyptian understanding of spiritual development as the gradual awakening to one's divine nature. Jung's analysis of alchemical symbolism revealed how Egyptian mythological themes had been preserved through centuries of apparent decline and suppression. The alchemical opus, with its emphasis on death and rebirth, the union of opposites, and the transformation of base matter into spiritual gold, represented a direct continuation of Osirian mystery traditions adapted to medieval Christian culture. The psychological interpretation of these symbols showed how ancient wisdom about consciousness transformation could be recovered and applied to contemporary human needs. The 20th century saw an explosion of interest in Egyptian mythology that went far beyond academic scholarship or artistic inspiration. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 captured global imagination in ways that revealed a deep hunger for connection with the sacred that modern civilization had failed to satisfy. The treasures of the Boy King weren't simply archaeological artifacts, but windows into a world where beauty, meaning, and transcendence were seamlessly integrated into daily life. This fascination with ancient Egypt coincided with the emergence of new spiritual movements that sought to recover mythological wisdom for contemporary seekers. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky and others, drew heavily on Egyptian sources in its attempt to synthesize Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. While often dismissed by academic scholars, these movements served crucial functions in preserving and transmitting mythological insights that might otherwise have been lost entirely. The development of transpersonal psychology in the latter half of the 20th century represented another phase in the scientific recovery of mythological wisdom. Researchers like Stanislav Grof, who studied non-ordinary states of consciousness, found that the symbolic language developed by ancient mystery traditions provided better maps for understanding transformative experiences than conventional psychological categories. The Egyptian emphasis on death and rebirth as fundamental life processes proved particularly relevant for understanding how consciousness could undergo radical transformation while maintaining continuity of identity. Contemporary neuroscience has begun to validate some of the insights about consciousness that Egyptian mythology had preserved for millennia. The discovery that the brain processes symbolic and analytical information through different neural networks suggests that mythological thinking isn't simply primitive pre-rational cognition, but a sophisticated way of organizing experience that complements rather than competes with rational analysis. The Egyptian understanding that symbols could serve as keys for accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness finds support in research showing how specific imagery can trigger altered states of awareness with measurable neurological correlates. The current revival of interest in ancient wisdom traditions reflects a growing recognition that purely materialistic worldviews, however scientifically sophisticated, cannot address fundamental human needs for meaning, purpose, and connection with transcendent reality. Egyptian mythology, with its emphasis on death and rebirth, its understanding of consciousness as divine in nature, and its recognition that individual transformation is inseparable from cosmic harmony, offers resources for addressing contemporary spiritual and psychological challenges that purely secular approaches cannot provide. The environmental crisis that threatens the future of human civilization has led many to rediscover Egyptian insights about the sacred nature of the natural world and humanity's responsibility to maintain harmony with cosmic order. The concept of ma'at, truth, justice, and cosmic balance, provides a framework for understanding environmental ethics that goes far beyond utilitarian calculations of costs and benefits to encompass the sacred dimension of humanity's relationship with the living earth. The global nature of contemporary culture has created new opportunities for Egyptian mythological wisdom to find expression through diverse cultural forms. The universal themes of death and rebirth, the search for lost wholeness, and the journey through darkness toward light continue to resonate across cultural boundaries, finding new forms of expression in literature, film, music, and digital media that reach audiences far beyond anything the ancient priests could have imagined. Yet this contemporary revival also faces challenges that echo those encountered by Egyptian mythology throughout its long history. The tendency to reduce complex mythological systems to simple New Age platitudes threatens to trivialize profound wisdom traditions. The commercialization of ancient symbols and practices risks turning sacred technologies for consciousness transformation into consumer products divorced from their original context and purpose. The challenge for contemporary seekers is to find ways of engaging with Egyptian mythological wisdom that honor both its ancient integrity and its contemporary relevance. This requires developing what we might call mythological literacy, the ability to understand symbolic language, to participate in transformative narratives, and to recognize the archetypal patterns that structure human experience without losing sight of the practical applications of such understanding. The educational systems that dominate modern culture rarely provide training in mythological literacy, focusing instead on analytical skills that, while valuable, represent only one dimension of human cognitive capacity. The recovery of mythological thinking requires conscious effort to develop ways of perceiving and understanding that have been marginalized by centuries of rationalist dominance, but remain essential for psychological wholeness and spiritual maturity. The integration of mythological and rational approaches to understanding represents one of the great challenges and opportunities of our time. Egyptian mythology, with its sophisticated understanding of consciousness, its practical methods for transformation, and its recognition that individual and cosmic development are inseparable, offers valuable resources for this integration. The ancient Egyptian understanding that human beings are divine sparks, temporarily embodied in material form, provides a framework for understanding human nature that honors both our earthly responsibilities and our transcendent potential. As we stand at this threshold between ancient wisdom and contemporary need, between mythological consciousness and historical awareness, we find ourselves in a position remarkably similar to that of the Egyptian priests, who faced successive waves of cultural change while maintaining their essential understanding of cosmic truth. Like them, we must learn to translate eternal insights into contemporary language, to find new forms of expression for ancient wisdom, and to demonstrate the continued relevance of mythological thinking for human flourishing and spiritual development. The gods of Egypt, who began their journey in the primordial waters of Nun and learned to adapt to countless cultural transformations, continue their eternal work in new forms suited to contemporary consciousness. They appear now not as external deities demanding worship, but as archetypal patterns within human awareness, as transformative processes available to anyone willing to undertake the inner work of conscious development, as guides for the eternal human quest to understand our place in the vast mystery of existence. The mythology that once sustained Egyptian civilization for over 3,000 years offers contemporary humanity resources for addressing challenges that purely secular worldviews cannot resolve. The ancient understanding that consciousness is primary, that transformation is possible, and that individual development serves cosmic purposes remains as relevant today as it was when the first pharaoh claimed divine authority and the first priest spoke words of power in a temple beside the eternal Nile. In learning to read the symbolic language of Egyptian mythology, we recover not just historical knowledge, but practical wisdom for navigating the complexities of contemporary existence. The stories of death and rebirth teach us about the psychological and spiritual transformations necessary for growth and healing. The emphasis on cosmic order provides frameworks for understanding our responsibilities to maintain harmony between human culture and natural systems. The recognition of divine potential within human consciousness offers hope for transcending the limitations that seem to constrain ordinary awareness. The journey through Egyptian mythology reveals that what we call ancient history is actually eternal present. Patterns of meaning and transformation that continue to operate within human consciousness regardless of changing cultural circumstances. The gods haven't disappeared. They've learned to speak the languages of depth psychology, transpersonal spirituality, and consciousness research. The mysteries haven't been lost. They've found new forms of expression suited to contemporary seekers who hunger for direct experience of transcendent reality. As our exploration of Egyptian mythology draws toward its close, we recognize that every ending is also a beginning, every death a preparation for rebirth, every completion the foundation for new creation. The ancient Egyptians understood this cyclical nature of existence and built their entire worldview around the recognition that what appears to end is simply transforming into new forms of expression. Their mythology doesn't conclude with the fall of the pharaohs or the closing of the temples, but continues to evolve, finding new voices, new symbols, new ways of guiding human consciousness toward its ultimate destination in conscious unity with the divine source from which all existence emerges and to which all beings ultimately return. The golden thread that we have followed through millennia of mythological development reveals itself to be not a relic of the past, but a living connection to eternal truths that remain as fresh and relevant today as they were when consciousness first emerged from the waters of chaos and began its long journey towards self-awareness, self-transformation, and ultimate self-realization in the light of infinite being that shines through all forms, while transcending every limitation that seems to constrain the boundless creativity of divine consciousness, expressing itself through the endless dance of creation, preservation, and transformation that we call existence itself. The transformation of Egyptian mythology in the modern era reveals something profound about the nature of spiritual truth itself, that authentic wisdom doesn't simply survive cultural change, but actually thrives through it, finding ever more sophisticated ways to address the deepest needs of human consciousness. As we trace the final chapters of this ancient tradition's influence, we discover that what began as stories told in temple courtyards beside the Nile has become a living stream of insight that continues to nourish human understanding in ways both obvious and hidden. The archaeological discoveries of the 19th and 20th centuries created unprecedented opportunities for direct engagement with Egyptian mythological thinking. When scholars first translated the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the various versions of the Book of the Dead, they weren't simply recovering historical documents, but accessing practical manuals for consciousness transformation that had been refined over millennia of use. These texts revealed that Egyptian mythology wasn't primitive folklore, but sophisticated technology for navigating the subtle dimensions of human experience. The psychological interpretation of these ancient texts opened entirely new possibilities for understanding their contemporary relevance. The journey through the Duat, with its gates, guardians, and tests, proved to be a remarkably accurate map of the unconscious mind and the challenges faced by anyone attempting to integrate shadow material into conscious awareness. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at wasn't just an ancient belief about post-mortem judgment, but a precise description of the moral and psychological evaluation that occurs whenever consciousness attempts to align itself with truth. This psychological reading of Egyptian mythology created bridges between ancient wisdom and modern therapeutic practice. Therapists working with clients experiencing major life transitions found that Egyptian symbols and narratives provided powerful tools for understanding and facilitating transformation. The myth of Isis, gathering the scattered pieces of Osiris, became a template for working with trauma and fragmentation. The Eye of Horus served as a symbol for the restoration of wholeness after injury or loss. The concept of multiple souls, Bae, Ka, AKH, offered nuanced ways of understanding different aspects of human identity and their various needs for development and integration. The emergence of Jungian analysis created particularly fertile ground for the revival of Egyptian mythological thinking. Jung's recognition that the psyche naturally thinks in symbols rather than concepts provided a theoretical framework for understanding why Egyptian mythology had proven so enduring and adaptable. The Egyptian pantheon, with its complex network of relationships and correspondences, mapped onto Jung's understanding of the archetypal dimensions of the unconscious with remarkable precision. Analysts working within the Jungian tradition discovered that clients often spontaneously produced Egyptian imagery during the process of individuation, even when they had no conscious knowledge of Egyptian mythology. Dreams of pyramids, encounters with ibis-headed figures, journeys through underground chambers. These symbols emerged from the depths of the psyche as natural expressions of transformative processes that the ancient Egyptians had understood and codified thousands of years earlier. The development of active imagination as a therapeutic technique drew heavily on methods that had been used in Egyptian mystery schools for facilitating conscious dialogue with archetypal forces. The practice of entering altered states of consciousness to encounter inner figures and receive guidance from them paralleled the Egyptian understanding of how human consciousness could commune with the Neteru, the divine principles that governed both cosmic and psychological processes. This psychological approach to Egyptian mythology also revealed new dimensions of meaning in familiar stories. The conflict between Horus and Set wasn't just a mythological narrative about divine succession, but a precise description of the tension between ego consciousness and shadow material that every individual must resolve in order to achieve psychological maturity. Set's role as both destroyer and protector reflected the ambiguous nature of the shadow, threatening when unconscious, but essential for psychological wholeness when properly integrated. The goddess Sekhmet's transformation from destructive lioness to nurturing healer provided a powerful model for understanding how intense emotional states could be channeled toward healing rather than destruction. Her mythology offered practical guidance for working with anger, rage, and other difficult emotions that conventional therapeutic approaches often struggled to address effectively. The educational implications of this psychological understanding of Egyptian mythology were profound. Traditional approaches to teaching about ancient Egypt focused on historical facts, archaeological discoveries, and cultural practices. But the psychological interpretation revealed that Egyptian mythology contained practical wisdom for contemporary life that was far more valuable than mere historical knowledge. Progressive educators began experimenting with approaches that used Egyptian mythological themes to teach not just about ancient history, but about human development, ethical reasoning, and the cultivation of wisdom. Students who learned about Ma'at didn't just memorize facts about ancient Egyptian religion, but developed frameworks for thinking about justice, truth, and social responsibility that could guide their own moral development. The artistic revival of interest in Egyptian mythology during the 20th century created new forms of cultural expression that carried ancient wisdom into contemporary consciousness through visual, auditory, and kinesthetic channels. Artists, musicians, and writers who drew inspiration from Egyptian sources weren't simply creating exotic entertainment, but serving as unconscious transmitters of archetypal patterns that could activate transformative processes in receptive individuals. The Surrealist movement's fascination with Egyptian imagery reflected an intuitive understanding that these ancient symbols could unlock doorways to non-rational dimensions of experience that conventional artistic forms couldn't access. Salvador Dali's Egyptian-influenced paintings, with their dreamlike juxtapositions and symbolic complexity, created visual environments that could trigger altered states of consciousness, similar to those cultivated in ancient mystery schools. The influence of Egyptian mythology on popular music, particularly in genres that emphasize transcendence and spiritual transformation, created new vehicles for transmitting mythological consciousness to mass audiences. Musicians who incorporated Egyptian themes, symbols, and concepts weren't just adding exotic flavor to their work, but channeling archetypal energies that could facilitate profound experiences of connection and transformation in listeners who were open to such influences. The film industry's recurring fascination with Egyptian themes reflected both the commercial appeal of exotic imagery and the deeper psychological resonance of mythological narratives that addressed universal human concerns. Movies that dealt seriously with Egyptian mythology, rather than simply using it as decoration, often became cultural phenomena that influenced how entire generations understood concepts like death, rebirth, and the relationship between human and divine consciousness. The rise of global communications technology created unprecedented opportunities for Egyptian mythological wisdom to spread beyond traditional cultural boundaries. Online communities dedicated to studying and practicing Egyptian spiritual traditions connected seekers from around the world, creating new forms of virtual temples where ancient wisdom could be explored and applied to contemporary challenges. These digital networks also facilitated scholarly collaboration that advanced understanding of Egyptian mythology in ways that would have been impossible in earlier eras. Researchers could now share discoveries instantly, compare interpretations across cultural perspectives, and develop more nuanced understandings of complex mythological systems through collective inquiry and debate. The democratizing effect of digital technology also meant that Egyptian mythological wisdom was no longer confined to academic specialists or initiated practitioners, but became accessible to anyone with curiosity and dedication. This accessibility created both opportunities and challenges. Opportunities for widespread spiritual enrichment, but also risks of superficial understanding and commercial exploitation. The environmental movement's discovery of Egyptian ecological wisdom represented another crucial dimension of contemporary mythological revival. As humanity grappled with the consequences of treating the natural world as mere resource for exploitation, ancient Egyptian concepts like the living mat, the recognition that human activity must align with natural cycles and cosmic order, offered alternative frameworks for understanding humanity's relationship with the earth. The Egyptian understanding that the pharaoh's primary responsibility was to maintain harmony between human culture and natural systems provided models for leadership that contemporary environmental activists found more inspiring than conventional political approaches. The concept of the king as servant of cosmic order rather than dominator of natural resources offered visions of governance based on ecological wisdom rather than economic exploitation. The goddess Isis, in her aspect as protector of the natural world and nurturer of all life, became a powerful symbol for environmental consciousness that transcended religious boundaries. Her mythology provided frameworks for understanding the feminine principle in nature that patriarchal cultures had systematically suppressed, offering resources for developing more balanced and sustainable approaches to human development. The integration of Egyptian mythological thinking with contemporary scientific understanding created fascinating new syntheses that honored both ancient wisdom and modern discoveries. Researchers studying consciousness, quantum physics, and systems theory found that Egyptian concepts like the interconnectedness of all existence, the primacy of consciousness over matter, and the correspondence between microcosm and macrocosm anticipated insights that cutting-edge science was just beginning to formulate. The Egyptian understanding of reality as fundamentally holographic, with each part containing information about the whole, resonated with discoveries in physics about the nature of space, time, and information. The mythological concept that consciousness could influence material reality through focused intention aligned with research showing how mental states could affect physical processes in measurable ways. These convergences between ancient wisdom and contemporary science created new possibilities for understanding human potential that neither tradition could achieve alone. The Egyptian recognition that consciousness was divine in nature provided metaphysical frameworks for interpreting scientific discoveries about the fundamental role of observation in determining physical reality. Scientific research into meditation, healing, and consciousness transformation provided empirical validation for practices that Egyptian mystery schools had developed through millennia of careful experimentation. The therapeutic applications of this integrated understanding proved particularly powerful for addressing contemporary psychological and spiritual challenges. Practitioners who combined Egyptian mythological frameworks with modern therapeutic techniques developed innovative approaches to healing trauma, facilitating personal transformation, and cultivating spiritual development that drew on the best insights from both traditions. The global nature of contemporary culture created new contexts for Egyptian mythological influence that transcended the geographical and cultural boundaries that had previously limited its spread. Egyptian symbols, concepts, and practices found expression through art forms, spiritual movements, and intellectual frameworks that reached audiences throughout Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Europe, creating a truly worldwide renaissance of interest in ancient Egyptian wisdom. This global dissemination also created opportunities for cross-cultural synthesis that enriched Egyptian mythology through contact with other wisdom traditions. The encounter between Egyptian and Hindu concepts of consciousness, between Egyptian and Buddhist understandings of death and rebirth, between Egyptian and indigenous American recognition of sacred reciprocity with nature, all of these interactions created new possibilities for understanding that honored the unique insights of each tradition while revealing underlying unities that suggested common sources in direct mystical experience. The women's spirituality movement found particularly rich resources in Egyptian mythology, which had always honored feminine divine principles in ways that Abrahamic traditions had systematically suppressed. The complex roles of goddesses like Isis, Hathor, Sekhmet, and Nut provided models for understanding feminine spiritual authority that went far beyond conventional religious categories of virgin, mother, and crone. These goddesses represented aspects of feminine divine power that were both nurturing and fierce, creative and destructive, accessible and mysterious. Their mythologies offered contemporary women frameworks for understanding their own spiritual nature that honored the full spectrum of feminine experience rather than confining it to narrow social roles. The men's movement also discovered valuable resources in Egyptian mythology, particularly in the stories of Horus's initiation into mature masculine authority and Osiris's transformation through death and resurrection. These narratives provided templates for understanding masculine development that emphasized service, wisdom, and conscious relationship with feminine principles rather than domination and control. The integration of masculine and feminine principles that Egyptian mythology exemplified through divine couples like Isis and Osiris, Nut and Geb, provided models for understanding gender relationships that transcended conventional polarities while honoring genuine differences. These mythological patterns offered guidance for developing more balanced and mutually enriching approaches to intimate relationships and community building. As we trace the final threads of Egyptian mythological influence into the present moment, we discover that what began as an ancient civilization's attempt to understand its place in the cosmos has become a permanent part of humanity's spiritual heritage. The insights encoded in Egyptian mythology continue to evolve, finding new forms of expression suited to contemporary consciousness, while maintaining their essential function as guides for the eternal human quest to understand the deeper meaning and purpose of existence. The gods who emerged from the primordial waters of Nun have learned to swim in the ocean of global consciousness, adapting their ancient wisdom to address the challenges and opportunities of an interconnected world, facing unprecedented possibilities for both transformation and destruction. Their mythology offers resources for navigating these challenges that purely secular worldviews cannot provide, frameworks for understanding consciousness, models for sustainable living, and practices for cultivating the wisdom and compassion necessary for humanity's continued evolution. The eternal themes of death and rebirth, of the search for lost wholeness, of the journey through darkness toward light, continue to resonate because they address fundamental aspects of human experience that remain constant despite all technological and social change. Egyptian mythology reminds us that we are not merely biological organisms competing for resources, but divine sparks temporarily embodied in material form, capable of conscious participation in cosmic evolution through the cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and direct experience of transcendent reality. In learning to read the symbolic language of Egyptian mythology, we recover not just historical knowledge, but practical wisdom for living with greater depth, meaning, and purpose. The ancient Egyptian recognition that individual transformation and cosmic harmony are inseparable provides frameworks for understanding personal development that honor both our earthly responsibilities and our transcendent potential. The mythology that sustained Egyptian civilization through 3 millennia of change offers contemporary humanity a living tradition of wisdom that continues to evolve while maintaining its essential insights about the divine nature of consciousness, the possibility of transformation, and the ultimate unity of all existence in the eternal dance of creation, preservation, and transformation that we call life itself. As we conclude this exploration of Egyptian mythology's complete history, we recognize that every ending is simultaneously a new beginning, every completion the foundation for fresh creation. The ancient Egyptians understood this cyclical nature of existence and built their entire worldview around the recognition that what appears to conclude is simply transforming into new forms of expression, new opportunities for growth, new possibilities for conscious participation in the eternal mystery of being that encompasses all forms while transcending every limitation. The golden thread of wisdom that we have followed through millennia of mythological development reveals itself as a living connection to truths that remain eternally fresh and relevant, continuing to guide human consciousness toward its ultimate destination in the light of infinite awareness that shines through all creation, while remaining forever beyond the grasp of conceptual understanding, yet always available to direct experience by those who possess the courage to undertake the inner journey that Egyptian mythology has mapped with such precision and compassion across the vast expanse of human spiritual history. The whispers of ancient Egypt haven't faded with the desert winds. They've learned to speak in languages we're only beginning to understand, through the strange coincidences that shift our lives at crucial moments, through dreams that arrive carrying symbols we've never encountered yet somehow recognize, through the sudden knowing that wells up in meditation when we least expect divine contact to pierce the veil of ordinary consciousness. Walk through any major city today, and you'll find Egyptian symbols carved into the facades of banks, government buildings, and monuments, obelisks standing in public squares, pyramids adorning currency, the all-seeing eye watching from dollar bills. These aren't mere decorative choices, but unconscious acknowledgements that this ancient wisdom still holds keys to understanding power, transformation, and the hidden forces that shape civilization itself. The mythology that began with Atum's emergence from primordial waters has become the underground river of human consciousness, surfacing whenever we're ready to remember that we are more than what we appear to be. Every person who has ever felt called to something greater, who has sensed divine presence moving through their life, who has experienced the death of an old identity and the birth of something new, they are walking the same path that Egyptian mythology mapped thousands of years ago. In therapy offices around the world, people discover they are living out archetypal patterns that Egyptian priests would have recognized immediately. The executive whose successful career suddenly collapses finds himself in the dismemberment of Osiris, scattered and confused until he learns to gather the pieces of his authentic self. The mother struggling with her own fierce protectiveness encounters Sekhmet's rage transformed into healing power. The seeker lost in spiritual confusion meets Thoth's wisdom, guiding them toward truth that transcends all conceptual understanding. These aren't metaphors or psychological projections, but direct encounters with the living forces that Egyptian mythology identified and learned to work with consciously. The ancient understanding that humans are divine beings temporarily embodied in material form offers the only framework adequate for comprehending the full spectrum of human experience. The ecstasy and the agony, the transcendent insights and the crushing defeats, the moments of crystal clarity and the periods of utter confusion. The technological revolution that has transformed modern life creates new opportunities for ancient wisdom to find expression. Virtual reality environments that recreate Egyptian temples allow contemporary seekers to experience sacred architecture designed to facilitate consciousness transformation. Biofeedback devices that monitor brainwaves during meditation provide scientific validation for the altered states that Egyptian mystery schools cultivated through ritual and practice. Global communication networks create virtual sanghas where people separated by continents can share experiences of archetypal encounter and mutual support for inner development. Yet technology alone cannot provide what Egyptian mythology offers: the recognition that consciousness is primary, that transformation is possible, and that individual development serves cosmic purposes that extend far beyond personal gratification or even personal survival. The ancient understanding that we are participants in an ongoing creation story, that our choices and actions contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself, provides meaning and purpose that no amount of material success or technological innovation can supply. The environmental crisis that threatens the future of human civilization calls us back to the Egyptian recognition that human culture must align with natural cycles and cosmic order if it is to remain sustainable. The concept of mamat, truth, justice, and harmony with universal principles, offers frameworks for understanding ecological ethics that go beyond utilitarian calculations to encompass the sacred dimension of our relationship with all life. Climate change, species extinction, and ecosystem collapse all reflect the consequences of forgetting what Egyptian civilization understood from its very beginning: that human activity must serve the greater harmony of existence rather than exploiting natural resources for short-term gain. The pharaoh's primary responsibility was to maintain balance between human needs and cosmic order, a model of leadership that contemporary environmental movements are rediscovering as they seek alternatives to purely economic approaches to planetary stewardship. The global nature of contemporary challenges requires the kind of universal perspective that Egyptian mythology developed through millennia of cultural synthesis and adaptation. The ancient recognition that divine truth manifests through countless local forms while maintaining essential unity provides frameworks for honoring cultural diversity while working toward common goals that serve all life. The refugee crises, economic inequalities, and social fragmentations that characterize modern civilization all reflect the consequences of forgetting our fundamental interconnectedness. The truth that Egyptian mythology expressed through its understanding of cosmic correspondence, its recognition that individual and universal development are inseparable aspects of a single evolutionary process. The revival of interest in consciousness studies, meditation practices, and alternative healing approaches reflects a growing recognition that materialistic worldviews, however scientifically sophisticated, cannot address the full range of human needs and potentials. Egyptian mythology offers resources for understanding consciousness, healing, and transformation that complement and enrich purely physical approaches, while never losing sight of the ultimate spiritual purposes that give meaning to all genuine development. The emergence of transpersonal psychology, the scientific study of mystical experiences, and the integration of contemplative practices with therapeutic approaches all represent contemporary attempts to recover insights that Egyptian mystery schools had refined through centuries of careful experimentation and practice. The ancient understanding that consciousness could undergo radical transformation while maintaining continuity of identity provides maps for navigating experiences that conventional psychology is only beginning to recognize and understand. As we stand at this threshold between ancient wisdom and contemporary possibility, we find ourselves in a position remarkably similar to that of the Egyptian initiates who descended into underground chambers to confront the mysteries of death and rebirth. Like them, we face the choice between remaining content with surface appearances or undertaking the inner work necessary to discover our true nature and purpose. The gods of Egypt continue their eternal work in forms suited to contemporary consciousness, not as external beings demanding worship, but as archetypal patterns within awareness itself, as transformative processes available to anyone willing to recognize their divine nature and accept responsibility for conscious participation in the ongoing creation of reality. The mythology that sustained Egyptian civilization through 3 millennia offers contemporary humanity what it has always offered: practical wisdom for living with greater depth, authentic guidance for navigating the complexities of existence, and direct pathways to the transcendent experiences that make life worth living regardless of external circumstances. The ancient Egyptian understanding that individual transformation serves cosmic purposes provides frameworks for finding meaning and direction in a world that often seems chaotic and purposeless. Every person who chooses conscious development over unconscious reactivity, who cultivates wisdom and compassion rather than fear and greed, who recognizes their divine nature and acts from that recognition, they are continuing the work that Egyptian mythology initiated when consciousness first emerged from chaos and began its long journey towards self-awareness and self-realization. The golden thread of wisdom that connects ancient Egypt to the present moment reveals itself as more than historical continuity. It is the living stream of consciousness itself, the eternal presence that manifests through all forms while transcending every limitation, the divine spark that animates all existence and calls us home to our true nature as expressions of infinite creative potential, seeking to know itself through the magnificent diversity of creation. In recognizing this truth, we discover that Egyptian mythology was never about the past, but has always been about the eternal now, the timeless dimension of existence where transformation is always possible, where meaning is always available, where the gods continue their ancient dance of creation, preservation, and renewal in the ever-fresh mystery of consciousness, awakening to its own infinite nature. The journey through Egyptian mythology reveals that what we call history is actually the eternal story of consciousness, exploring its own depths, discovering its own potentials, and gradually awakening to the truth that has always been present but needed time and experience to be fully recognized and embodied. This is the ultimate teaching of the ancient wisdom, that we are not separate from the mystery we seek to understand, but are the mystery itself, expressing through human form the same divine creativity that shaped the cosmos and continues to guide its evolution toward ever greater expressions of beauty, truth, and love. The gods haven't gone anywhere. They are here now, as present as they ever were, waiting patiently for us to remember who we really are and to take our place consciously in the eternal dance of creation that began before time and will continue long after all forms have dissolved back into the source from which they emerged, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of eons spent exploring the infinite possibilities of divine consciousness, expressing itself through the ever-changing kaleidoscope of existence. And with that recognition, our journey through Egyptian mythology comes full circle, returning us to the beginning with deeper understanding, ready to continue the eternal exploration with eyes opened by ancient wisdom and hearts prepared for the endless adventure of conscious participation in the divine mystery that we are, that we have always been, and that we will continue to be throughout all the transformations that await us in the boundless creativity of existence itself. Sleep well and dream of the eternal stars that shine in the darkness, guiding all seekers home to the light that never dims, the truth that never changes, the love that embraces all creation in its infinite compassion and endless grace.